It's been dubbed the real-life murder on Elm Street. When police arrived at the Salida Massacre crime scene on May 20th, 1990, they were confronted with a scene of horrific violence. The house on Elm Street was filled with the bodies of 4 people who had been brutally murdered by Gerald Cruz and his followers. The victims had suffered violent deaths. Some had been stabbed multiple times, and one woman was nearly decapitated, but she lived to tell the tale. There were signs of a savage attack, with blood splattered throughout the residence. Police later described the crime scene as chaotic and disturbing, with multiple victims having been attacked in different parts of the house. Investigators were initially shocked by the brutality and the degree of overkill involved, which suggested that the murders were not impulsive, but rather carried out with premeditation and extreme rage. The methodical nature of the killings, combined with the cult's use of masks and camouflage during the attack, led authorities to believe they were dealing with an organized and dangerous group. It wasn't long before they discovered the involvement of Gerald Cruz and his cult known as The Cause, connecting the crime to his leadership and control over the followers. So, how did this happen? What would drive people to do such a terrible thing? Well, those are the questions we're going to try to answer today. So sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hi everyone, welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin and I am fascinated by all things cult, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. I am posting 3 videos a week on one of these topics this month, so if you like this sort of thing with a little mysticism and spooky stuff thrown in there for October, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you here. And without further ado, we are going to jump right into today's video. Gerald Cruz led a deadly cult known as The Cause, a group that manipulated and terrorized vulnerable individuals in California during the late 1980s and early 1990s. Cruz, who was described as a master manipulator, preyed on people who were struggling, those who were homeless or isolated, and drew them into his commune, which operated like a quasi-military compound near Salida, California. He convinced his followers that he had special powers, and over time, his control over them grew more extreme. Now, Gerald Cruz had a troubled upbringing, and this significantly shaped his later actions as that manipulative cult leader. He was born in 1964 in Modesto, California, where he was raised primarily by his mother. His father was largely absent from his life, leaving Cruz without a strong paternal figure. And this left a significant void that would later be filled by the delusional belief that he possessed special powers. Now, Cruz's mother was a nurse, a single mom, and she had a profound impact on him. And he didn't have a traditional religious upbringing. So Cruz developed a fascination with the occult and mysticism, often mixing these ideas with the sense of the special purpose that he had that was instilled in him by his mother. Now, Gerald Cruz's relationship with his mother played a significant role in shaping this delusional mindset and eventual path to becoming a cult leader. Her constant reinforcement of his special status created a sense of superiority in him from an early age. So rather than offering him a balanced or grounded perspective, she encouraged his fantasies of power and influence. And this constant validation of his supposed mystical abilities not only nurtured his delusions, but it also laid the foundation for the control he would later exercise over his cult followers. The belief in these special abilities gave Cruz the foundation he needed to portray himself as a messianic figure to his followers. His mother's validation fostered a sense of entitlement and a belief that he was chosen for a higher purpose, which made him increasingly detached from reality. Over time, this distorted sense of identity became the cornerstone of his leadership within the cause. The psychological impact of being told that he had special powers cannot be overstated. It allowed Cruz to develop this grandiose self-image, and as he grew older, this evolved into a dangerous sense of invincibility. By the time he started the cause, Cruz was completely convinced of his own authority and special destiny, seeing himself as a leader who could shape the future of the world. Now, there isn't much detailed information about Gerald Cruz's father, but from what is known, his father was basically absent for most of his life. This absence left Cruz without a significant male role model, contributing to the emotional void that would later shape his delusions of power and control. And this likely increased his dependence on his mother, whose influence over him was dominant. Cruz grew up believing entirely in the narratives his mother fed him. He had special powers and was destined for greatness. And without the balance of another adult or paternal figure to counter these ideas, Cruz's perception of reality became increasingly distorted. The lack of male authority or discipline may have even contributed to Cruz's development into an authoritarian leader, seeking to control others in the way his mother had controlled him during his formative years. His upbringing lacked stability, which likely contributed to Cruz's later extreme behavior. Now, years later, he would end up creating his cult. And of course, it would be called The Cause, because every cult has to sound like it has some higher purpose and make you feel like you're better than everybody else who's not in the cult. Cruz framed his cult as a mission of divine purpose and societal cleansing. Yeah, there's some deeply rooted white supremacy going on here. He convinced his followers that they were part of a higher calling, tasked with a special mission to create a, quote, new order by purifying society through violence, survivalism, and military preparedness. The name, The Cause, reflected Cruz's belief that they were working toward a greater cause, one that justified the extreme measures that they took, including the use of punishment and even murder. Now, Cruz manipulated his followers into thinking that their lives had a righteous purpose, which is obviously a common tactic among cult leaders to instill this idea of loyalty and commitment to the leader and the cause. He combined elements of that white supremacist ideology with occult beliefs to reinforce this idea that their mission or their cause was unique and crucial. And it was this sense of purpose that helped Cruz maintain control of his members, because they believed that they were sacrificing their own lives and morality for a higher cause that would end up bringing societal change. But in reality, the cause was Cruz's vehicle for exercising control and power over his followers. He masked his violent, delusional desires under the guise of a greater spiritual and societal mission, even though it's rooted in this ideology that's inherently racist and disgusting. He would eventually convince those followers to move to a commune that he would call the camp. Now, the camp operated under strict rules, and members who disobeyed those rules were subject to punishments, decided by something he called the Wheel of Punishment. It's a device that randomly assigned tortures that ranged from beatings to sodomy. And like I've said in so many of my cult videos, I swear that people become cult leaders so they can justify their grotesque and depraved desires. And it sounds like Cruz was doing just that. Cruz maintained strict control over his followers by instilling fear, punishing them severely for any infraction, and isolating them from the outside world. But how did they even get sucked in the first place? Because we all know that with cults, there's always something that seems to be good from the outside. Gerald Cruz's rise to becoming the leader of the cause cult was a gradual process shaped by his manipulative tendencies and the exploitation of vulnerable individuals. He first began to exert control by drawing in people who were socially or economically disadvantaged, oftentimes targeting those who were homeless, isolated, or struggling with some kind of personal problem. Many of these individuals were in desperate need of support and direction. And just like every cult leader before and after him, Cruz exploited that by offering them a sense of belonging and purpose within his group. Cruz preyed on people who had no strong social or familial support systems. He offered them a community and claimed that they were chosen. He claimed he chose them to be part of a special mission, and he had positioned himself as a spiritual leader, claiming that he possessed those special powers and had been chosen by a higher force to lead them, the chosen ones. This appealed to those who were lost or searching for meaning, especially because Cruz presented his group as an opportunity to be a part of something larger than themselves. And he was charismatic and made a lot of spiritual promises. He said he had supernatural powers and that he said he could lead them to salvation. He was able to manipulate people into believing that they were part of a divine mission. And this made him an attractive leader to those who were searching for more meaning in their lives. He convinced his followers that he was superhuman, constantly reinforcing his image as a leader with magical abilities. His authoritarian leadership style was only strengthened by his creation of that wheel of punishment. So he had really laid the groundwork for a successful cult. He built his followers up, gave them community, gave them support, and then punished them to try to break them down, break their will, and ensure total loyalty. Now, Cruz incorporated a military-like structure into the cult's daily activities. He required followers to train with weapons and prepare for what he claimed would be an imminent apocalypse or battle. Now, this paranoia fed into Cruz's need to control every aspect of his followers' lives, as he convinced them that they were preparing for a great conflict with the outside world, this us versus them mentality. The sense of danger and urgency further solidified his control, and his followers felt like they needed to remain loyal to survive in the coming conflict. To further illustrate this us versus them mentality and emphasize his perceived danger of the outside forces like society and the government, Cruz established the camp, that quasi-military compound near Salida, where his followers lived under strict rules. This isolation from the outside world allowed Cruz to maintain total control over his members, and it prevented them from leaving or interacting with any non-members. He was controlling their behavior, the information they had access to, and of course their thoughts and emotions, just like every other cult leader. Now, inside the commune, Cruz's word was law, and he used this punishment and reward tactic to reinforce his power over others. And this isolation also made it really difficult for members to seek help or escape. Now, Cruz's influence over his followers was extreme. Many were subjected to psychological and even physical abuse, which Cruz, of course, justified as being necessary for purifying or strengthening them. His followers became so loyal that they were literally willing to commit murder at his command, believing that disobedience would result in their own deaths. But what exactly was daily life like at the camp? Well, it was organized in that militaristic fashion, with Cruz at the helm. Members were expected to obey his commands without question, and any act of defiance or disobedience was met with severe punishment. Cruz was obsessed with control, and every aspect of life at the camp, from when the members woke up to how they interacted with one another, was dictated by his rules. Now, members often participated in daily drills and were trained in the use of firearms. This was partly because of Cruz's paranoid preparation for an apocalyptic event or conflict with outside forces like, oh, people are going to have to take Cruz down because he's so mystical and magical and powerful. They're all after him. He was just like deeply, deeply paranoid. So these weapons were a common part of life at the camp, as Cruz believed in building a self-sufficient militant community. And this is really reminding me of Waco. And if you want me to do a video on Waco, let me know. I just feel like so many people have talked about it. But I feel like this group is if MAGA and Waco had a baby and created this cult, I feel like that's this group right here. I feel like this is the cult they would create. It's so strange how history seems to repeat itself. I mean, literally, this group is using words like New World Order, and I feel like I've heard so many MAGA people spout that type of rhetoric. It's kind of crazy. But one of the most disturbing elements of life at the camp was the system of punishment. So, what would happen if you tried to defy Cruz or leave the cult? Well, oftentimes you would be subjected to incredibly brutal treatment. According to survivors, the punishments created an atmosphere of constant fear, where even minor infractions could lead to violent consequences. And Cruz used these extreme tactics to maintain his control and prevent any resistance within the group. He indoctrinated his followers with a mix of that white supremacist ideology, but also occult beliefs, claiming that they were chosen to help create that New World Order. He believed in purifying society through violence, just like Hitler. Maybe we stop idolizing mass murderers and people who cause genocide. Just maybe we stop doing that. He would literally hold sermons and meetings and then reinforce that he had these like mystical powers and was leading this divine mission. You know, it's giving like clearing the planet. It's giving Scientology. I think I'm too old to use the words it's giving, but I digress. Now, members weren't encouraged to just see themselves as humans fighting for a better world. They were told to consider themselves warriors, literally going to war against any outside entity, aka society or the government. Now, the camp was located in a very remote area, and the living conditions were very harsh. They had limited access to basic resources. Members lived in a communal setting, and their daily needs were tightly controlled by Cruz. The isolation made it really difficult for members to leave if they even wanted to, and they were constantly being indoctrinated and re-indoctrinated. So psychologically, it was also difficult to leave. They had no support network either inside or outside the group. He also convinced them that the outside world was corrupt and dangerous. So this reinforced their reliance on him. So now they need him for their basic needs, all their basic human needs, their spiritual needs, and their safety. They became totally dependent on him, and they became very committed to the group and the cause. So in order to be prepared for what Cruz believed would be an impending conflict, members of the camp trained in survival tactics and firearm use. He even had a stockpile of weapons and believed that they would need to defend themselves against any perceived threat. And this training also became part of the cult's daily routine. I mean, he wanted the members to be in a constant state of what he called readiness for violence. Now, Cruz was great at psychological manipulation, and he manipulated his followers by exploiting their vulnerabilities. So since most of those recruits were homeless or struggling with personal issues, that made them easier to control because they really didn't have anywhere to go. He convinced them that they were special, that he chose them for a divine purpose. Life at the camp was a harrowing mix of military-like discipline, fear-based control, and psychological abuse, all under Cruz's leadership. This environment culminated in the tragic events of the Salida massacre, in which Cruz ordered several of his followers to commit murder. It's literally like he's using a cult leader playbook, because this sounds a lot like Charles Manson. So this massacre was rooted in a feud between Cruz and Franklin Rapper, a former member of the cause. Rapper had left the cult after disagreements involving a stolen gun and drug-related issues. So Cruz, being the ever paranoid guy that he was, viewed this departure as a total threat to his authority. So Cruz decided that Rapper and anyone associated with him needed to be eliminated. That's right, eliminated. So he instructed his loyal followers to carry out a violent revenge mission, all under the guise of protecting the cause. On the night of May 20th, Cruz and several of his followers, armed and wearing camouflage, descended on Rapper's home at 812 Elm Street. Inside was Rapper, Darlene Paris, and a few other people. The cult followers, under Cruz's direct orders, were told to, quote, leave no witnesses, and they launched a brutal attack on everyone in the home. Franklin Rapper was beaten and stabbed to death. Darlene Paris was nearly decapitated, and the two other victims were murdered in similarly horrific fashion. But there was one person, Donna Alvarez, who managed to escape the bloodbath by hiding and later reported the crime. The attack was particularly vicious, with Cruz's followers acting under his strict commands, believing that they were fulfilling his will and advancing the goals of the cause. These brutal killings shocked the community of Salida and led to the swift arrest of Gerald Cruz and several of his cult members. This is where the victims become the perpetrators. If anyone asks you to kill someone else for their spiritual cause, I think that's probably the biggest sign ever that you're in a cult and need to flee, run, escape. And Cruz really had the audacity because he denied having any involvement in the crime at all. But during the investigation, police found a lot of evidence tying Cruz to the murders, such as that infamous wheel of punishment that he used to basically torture his followers. But they didn't just find the wheel of punishment. They also found many weapons and satanic literature. Many of Cruz's accomplices were also convicted, with many of them claiming that they were brainwashed into participating. Now, I prefer to use the term indoctrinated because brainwashed is so taboo, and some people consider it to be like a positive thing, but it is not. It's indoctrination. It's cult indoctrination. So in 1992, Gerald Cruz was sentenced to death for his role in the massacre. His followers were also convicted of various charges related to the murders. While many of the members of the cause were convicted, some managed to escape and rebuild their lives. Survivors have spoken out about their time in the cult, sharing their stories of manipulation, fear, and eventual escape. One survivor says, quote, looking back, I can't believe I let it go that far. But Gerald had a way of making you feel like you were part of something important, like you had no choice but to follow him. And that was actually Donna Alvarez who said that, the one who witnessed the massacre. So today, these survivors are continuing to build their lives, but the trauma of their time in the cause still lingers. Many of them still struggle with the psychological scars that were left due to Cruz's manipulation. It's always so scary to think about cults that have such extreme beliefs that are rooted in hate, like white supremacy. It's really difficult to hear that anyone who aligns with any spiritual belief can consider themselves to be doing it for a good cause. And like I've said many times with these cultic groups, it sounds like Gerald just had this almost like Napoleon complex and believed he was entitled to other people's bodies and was deeply, deeply, deeply paranoid, but charismatic enough to get people to do all of his evil bidding for him. And this case of Gerald Cruz and the cause, it stands as a chilling reminder of the dangers of manipulation, control, and violence. I mean, his ability to exploit vulnerable individuals and turn them into tools of his paranoia literally resulted in tragedy. It resulted in several people's deaths. And now, as we reflect on this case, it's important to remember those survivors, those who managed to escape and tell their stories. And of course, we must remember the lives that were lost due to Cruz's delusions. Those people just wanted to leave a dangerous group and dangerous situation. and they ended up being killed for it. Now, we don't always hear about this extreme of a situation with these cults, right? We hear about other terrible things that happen within cults. We hear about people being abused, essayed, branded, otherwise hurt and manipulated. And something that I want to discuss here quickly, very briefly, is some followers of cults are so shamed before they get out. It's the idea of, why didn't you get out sooner? Why didn't you just leave? And this is a perfect example of why you can't just leave. Because not only do these people not have any support on the outside of the cult, and not only is there the threat that they'll be ostracized, never spoken to again, and they'll lose all the connections that they made within the cult, with the cause, they were literally killed for leaving the group. Leaving a cult can be incredibly, incredibly dangerous. So I just want to make sure that we are being more empathetic to the people that find themselves in these dangerous and destructive groups, because it's not always as easy as just up and leaving. Sometimes leaving could mean sudden death. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you found this video interesting or informative, please consider liking and subscribing, and I will be back later this week. This tragic case really highlights how powerful and dangerous manipulation can be, especially when cult leaders prey on vulnerable individuals, leading them to commit the horrifying acts of violence. And I hope that today we're able to think about that a little bit more, empathize a little bit more, and try to really, really understand how people can get sucked into a group like this. Unfortunately, this is a group that's based in so much hate, so it's still hard to find the empathy sometimes. But I also wonder if some of these people who were homeless, didn't really have family, didn't have a support network, they didn't join because they were white supremacists. They joined because they were offered community and shelter and food. And the white supremacy was something they just had to start kind of believing in if they wanted to still maintain getting those basic needs met. Still doesn't justify the belief in being racist. Like, we definitely don't want that. But I just can't imagine going to the lengths of murdering someone because my cult leader told me to. But that's how indoctrination works. That is how extreme it can be. So I hope that sinks in. And I hope that this video was helpful to you. And I really, really appreciate you tuning in today. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And I will see you in my next video very, very soon. I have a lot of cool things coming up for you this month. So please make sure you're subscribed. Anyways, guys, please be safe out there. Always ask questions and always stay skeptical. Until my next video. Bye.